The Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp is considered the largest and deadliest extermination camp in the German Empire at the time. An estimated 1.1 million Jews, Sinti and Roma, and homosexuals were murdered here. Around 900,000 of the deported people were killed in the gas chambers immediately after their arrival. The founder and commander of Auschwitz-Birkenau was Rudolf Höss, who was an integral part of the systematically carried out Holocaust. Tasked with ordering the final solution, Höss constructed a system in which the arriving people were murdered as efficiently as possible. Under his leadership, the infamous poison Zyklon B was used for the first time to carry out gassing on an industrial scale. This video is about the cruel crimes of Rudolf Höss and the prosecution and punishment of this criminal that took place after the war. Rudolf Höss was born on November 25, 1901, as the son of a merchant in the city of Baden-Baden. His family were devout Catholics and his father wanted him to become a Catholic priest. After the First World War, Rudolf Höss was active in various nationalist groups. He is said to have been involved in attacks against Polish and French occupying troops. In 1922, he attended a speech given by Adolf Hitler in Munich and was enthusiastic about his views. Höss cut all ties to the church and joined the NSDAP, making him one of the first 3,000 followers of this right-wing radical party. As early as 1923, Höss was involved in the murder of an alleged spy for a nationalist group and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. As part of a general amnesty, he was released after just 5 years, and was then, after the National Socialists came to power in 1933, Rudolf Höss officially joined the SS. At that time, Höss already had contact with Heinrich Himmler, who persuaded him to join the SS Totenkopf division in 1934. The Death's Head units were a special unit of the SS whose primary purpose was the elimination of political opponents, the exploitation of Jews and other unaccepted minorities, and later the internment of prisoners of war. The unit was considered extremely brutal and unscrupulous, and was distinguished externally by a silver skull and crossbones on the right collar patch in front of the other SS troops. Rudolf Höss was employed as a guard in the Dachau concentration camp from December 1934, in which he made a name for himself and was promoted several times. In 1938, he was transferred to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp and took over the management of the protection camp there. Höss was responsible for the execution of prisoners in Sachsenhausen and, among other things, shot numerous Jehovah's Witnesses. Even at this time, Höss was responsible for treacherous crimes. For example, on an icy winter day he ordered that all prisoners without an assigned job stay outside. Most of the prisoners were only wearing their scanty prison clothing and froze to death within a very short time. More than 130 people died. The Second World War began with the attack on Poland on September 1, 1939, and within a very short time the country was completely conquered. At the beginning of 1940, Heinrich Himmler gave instructions to find a suitable location for a concentration camp in the occupied Eastern Territories, for which an investigation was started under the direction of Rudolf Höss. Höss recommended that Himmler build the camp in the buildings of a former Polish barracks in Auschwitz, and the Reichsfuhrer SS officially ordered the construction of the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp at the end of April. Höss was appointed camp commandant of Auschwitz, a role he would hold for more than 4 years. The Auschwitz concentration camp, which later became very large, began with the construction of the main camp, also known as Auschwitz I. In contrast to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, the Auschwitz main camp was not used as an extermination camp but as a labor camp, in which the prisoners had to do forced labor under the most inhumane conditions. An estimated 70,000 people died in the main camp due to the poor living conditions, or the mistreatment of the camp staff, and the area was also used as an execution site for political opponents. In June 1941, Rudolf Höss was ordered to Berlin and informed by Himmler that Adolf Hitler had ordered the final solution of the Jews, and that Auschwitz concentration camp was to serve as the central location for these mass killings, with Höss receiving more detailed instructions from Adolf Eichmann. As one of the main organizers of the Holocaust, Eichmann knew the number of transports to be expected and communicated this to Höss, making it clear that only gas would be used for the murder. For the next few months, Höss and his subordinates experimented with various gassing methods which were carried out on unsuspecting prisoners. Cyclone B, which was actually primarily used as a pesticide for delousing, turned out to be particularly effective. Höss testified later in the trial that the effectiveness of Cyclone B had convinced him that they would now begin mass executions. In October 1941, construction of the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp began, and with it the systematic implementation of the Holocaust. Most of the prisoners arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau by train and were driven into the camp via an unloading ramp. A selection was carried out there in which people who were unable to work were sorted out and taken to the gas chambers to be murdered, most of them children. Old people or sick people, family members were brutally separated from each other, mothers were deprived of their children, and any form of humanity was missing. In some cases, entire transports were sent directly to the gas chambers without selection. An estimated 900,000 people were murdered immediately after their arrival and burned in the adjacent crematoria. Those who were not gassed immediately had to do hard labor in inhumane conditions and face arbitrary torture or even murder on a daily basis. Prisoners were killed by guards for even the smallest of offenses, sometimes just on a whim. In Auschwitz, cruel human experiments were carried out, for example by Joseph Mengele, who carried out experiments on twins, small people, and gypsies, among other things. Various cruel methods of mass sterilization were tried, which would later render millions of people infertile. As camp commander, Rudolf Höss had control over the killing machine known as Auschwitz. Witnesses described him as a calm, ice-cold technocrat who only cared about fulfilling the orders to kill people. In November 1943, Höss was called to Berlin and temporarily lost his position as camp commandant. There is speculation that this happened because of an affair that Höss began with a female prisoner in 1942. The woman became pregnant and was then forced to have an abortion. The SS then prepared charges. However, this was dropped shortly afterwards. In May 1944, Höss returned to Auschwitz and took command of the camp again. At the time, he led the operation named after him, Höss, in which 430,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered within 56 days. To political tensions, Hungary was annexed by Germany in March 1944, and the Jews living there were deported to extermination camps on an unprecedented scale. Even Auschwitz could not cope with the number of people arriving, and the capacity of the gas chambers and crematoria reached its limits. Mass shootings were carried out in which Jews were led to cremation pits where they were murdered and burned directly. At the end of 1944, the Red Army advanced further and further towards Auschwitz, and the concentration camp was gradually evacuated. Rudolf Höss left the camp on November 6 and was taken to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where he took over management of the gas chamber that was built in January 1945. In the last weeks of the war, he was responsible for the gassing of 2,500 female prisoners. After the war, Rudolf Höss was able to successfully create a false identity as a Marine and was not recognized during his short time as a prisoner of war. He then went into hiding as an agricultural assistant in the Flensburg area and was able to evade arrest for more than a year. Rudolf Höss was tracked down by investigators from the War Crime Investigation Team and arrested on March 11, 1946. When arrested, Höss posed as a gardener named Franz Lang, but was identified because of his wedding ring. In the following weeks, he gave several witness statements in the Nuremberg trials that were taking place at the time, and was then extradited to Poland on May 25. On March 11, 1947, Höss was tried in Warsaw. The former camp commandant made detailed statements about the crimes committed in Auschwitz and described the systematic gassing of the prisoners in a completely emotionless manner. He had no ethical concerns about the extermination of the Jews and never expected to be held accountable. According to psychological reports, Rudolf Höss was not a sadist, but an absolutely unfeeling person who carried out the ordered mass killing without question. Until the end, he didn't understand why he was being held accountable since he had only followed orders. Rudolf Höss was sentenced to death on April 2, 1947. The execution took place on April 16 on the grounds of the Auschwitz concentration camp. The gallows still stand on the memorial site today and commemorate one of the greatest criminals of National Socialism. Please like and share this video so that this part of history can never repeat itself again.